on as well. So it will be going on our YouTube channel once it's obviously been done and dusted at the very end of it. So we'll upload that, and I'll also send an email out with that link as well for that as well. So I say we do have a series of 3 sessions. So this is the first one. The next one's going to be next week, so it'll be next Thursday. So that one's a bit of a longer session. That's going to be about a 90-minute session. So what we're going to be doing with that is taking your journey a little bit further, so going beyond the basics of digital accessibility, and then start to take it into that the sort of bigger areas. So how do you start off with digital accessibility today, and then the next session is looking going beyond that, and how do you develop a little bit further beyond that journey? Because again, trying to pinpoint where you are and how you move forward, that's always the hard bit for quite a lot of people, is that they're not quite sure how to get forward and how to move forward. So this is what this whole series is all about. Okay. We do have a shameless plug for a few courses that obviously we do offer as well. But again, you know, it's the sort of world that we live in, and we do offer some very, very affordable courses. And I can say that because I have seen some very eye-watering amounts for courses for this. So I can say, actually, you know, we are definitely in that sort of area to try and make sure we can empower people to do digital accessibility. And that's through the learning, actually making sure that's achievable for a lot of people as well. Okay. So like I say, for those of you who have just joined us, feel free to use the chat throughout. Feel free to introduce yourself. Feel free to ask questions throughout. But I will be asking for some suggestions on certain things as we go through. Okay. So we'll get started then. So I'm just going to put something up on the board there for you, so you should see that on your screen. So it says there, so which of the following do you consider or not when creating digital content? Okay. So you've got quite a few different suggestions there for you. All right, so let's say any digital content that you might create that could come down to documents, it could come down to any sort of presentations, it could be you're a web developer, for example. Are there any particular key demographics or key people or key areas that you do consider when you are creating it? Okay, so I'll give you a minute also to have a little think about it. So if you just put in the chat which of those areas you think you do cover. So I'll put the letters there, so A, B, C, D, and so on. And then you've got H down the bottom there, so saying none of the above. Okay. So if you can put in which one of those that you do consider, or which multiple ones that you do consider, then please put that in the chat. Please don't be fearful about putting H in for none of the above. That's perfectly fine. The whole idea is we're trying to make this as sort of free and open as we possibly can. Everyone's here to learn. And that's why I've put these sessions on, is just trying to start you, even if you haven't even considered any of this in the past. Okay. So I'll give you a couple of minutes, just have a little think about that. I suppose I should have put in something there saying all of the above. But if you have, I'll be very, very surprised, especially if you want an intro to digital accessibility course. Well, that's a bad thing. There are quite a few people typing away there, which is good. Yeah, a few answers coming in, which is good. All right. For those of you who've just joined us, so welcome. We're just having a quick little starting exercise, just kind of seeing which of these areas people will consider when they're thinking about digital content, digital accessibility, and so on. Very good answer there from Daniel. So try our best to consider B and E, which is really, really good, because you know this whole idea is about trying. You will never be perfect in any of these areas. I will still hold my hands up and say, no way I am perfect in any of these areas. So, you know, it's always a really, really good way of looking at it. So quite a few good smattering of answers. So B, E's, and G's, and so on. All right. It's good stuff. All right. So the reason why I put all of those on there is because actually these are very, very big areas that people don't often consider. Okay. So if we're looking at A through to G, what we can consider all those people as being is that they make up the largest digital user group in the world. Okay, so if you've got someone who is elderly, disabled, veterans, non-native English speakers, and so on and so forth, These people, when they're online, they make up the largest digital user group in the world. The reason why I say that is because many people kind of forget different areas or different groups of people, for example. So therefore, it's obviously really interesting to think that actually, if you're ignoring three, maybe four of those different areas, you are missing out a large portion of the population, no matter which country you operate in. So therefore, it's always worth thinking about actually. People think, well, I not really have much in my market for someone who's disabled or someone who's elderly or someone with loads of digital literacy. But actually, if you start to consider all those people together, you are missing out a major opportunity and a major market reach as well. So what comes from that is that people with additional access requirements. Digital accessibility is not just for people with disabilities, it's for anyone who requires additional access requirements. So that can be someone who maybe got low vision but don't consider themselves to be disabled, someone who's got hearing loss but doesn't consider themselves as being disabled, but they might still use the captions when they're watching a video, for example. They might still use a screen reader, even though they don't actually physically consider themselves as being disabled. So it's always worth considering who else can I be applying this to. Visual accessibility, therefore, is not just for the disabled. There are some areas in there which people will probably be surprised about. So someone with low digital literacy, so that might just be someone who maybe isn't that comfortable in going online and they do it because they kind of have to, or even their access to the internet or certain software and hardware. Most people access the internet on their phone. So therefore, it's actually going to be a case of actually can they access everything that maybe is designed for web. All right. So therefore, it's actually kind of thinking more along those lines of actually who should we aiming for? Okay. So that was a nice little starter for you, just to kind of get you thinking about actually this is the sort of remit that we're looking at. This is the sort of area where we're looking. Okay. So this is the introduction course. So it's part of a series. So we've got 3 sessions, as I've already mentioned. So my name is Barry Williams. So I'm the digital accessibility lead tutor for National Upskill. And kind of what we're doing is obviously we offer courses in digital accessibility for anyone and everyone. And the whole idea is obviously we're just going to be partnering this part with Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is coming up on the 15th. So this is a whole series of things that we are doing for that. So keep an eye out for emails and so on from us for the other sessions. What I would like you to do now is, because some people have kind of come along here with maybe something in mind, or maybe they've just come here just to kind of absorb things. What I want you to give you the chance to do is basically ask me anything at all. Okay. Again, you don't have to. It's totally up to you what you want to do. But again, this whole idea is about it being an open forum. Okay. So with this ask me anything, of course, it also applies to digital accessibility, keeping it very specific. There are some keywords along the top there where I'll just try to get you to think about things if you do have any questions in this area. So some of you may have heard of this WCAG, so WCAG. Some of you may have heard of widgets. Some might think about legislation, or some of you might just even think about, well, where do I start? Okay. So I want to have a little think about it. So I'll give you about a minute or so if you want to try to type something in, but I will carry on as you're typing away. All right, that's just kind of some suggestions for you to think about. Right, but what I will do, I'll try and answer as best as I can. If I can't, I'll make sure I get back to you. All right, but again, the whole idea is this is meant to be about an open forum, as best as it possibly could be for you. Okay, so like I say, I'll keep that in mind if you do have any questions as we go through. So aim of today's session then is not to provide you with a long list of things that you won't remember. That's the big key area about this, all right? I'm not teaching you to say, actually, you should do this and do this and do this. I'm just trying to provide you with things that you can consider when you are designing content. Whole idea is, where do people start? That's always a thing that people are always really concerned about, right? I'm going to try and think about, well, actually, how do I design things? And then I'll kind of give you that same idea. So therefore, you feel a little bit more comfortable whenever you do come to something and say, well, actually, should I consider this or should I do that? Because it is very crowded in terms of the information that's out there. So you only have to go on LinkedIn for 5 minutes and be swamped, right? Whole idea is I'm trying to think about breaking it down as best as I possibly can in order to help you, in order to help other people. The next session, which is on Thursday the 15th, so it's a weekday, this one's going to be providing more practical tips and tools for your starting point and how you can move forward with it. All right. Some people may be further along in the accessibility journey than others. Therefore, you need to kind of think about, well, actually, how do I go from where I am now to where I want to be? Or how do I kind of know what I know now? And then where do I move on from now? Because some people think, well, actually, I haven't considered this, or do I do that? And then even things like legislation and so on can be very confusing. So therefore, I'm trying to kind of boil it down to say, well, actually, you should be considering this or you shouldn't be considering this. Okay. So aims of the 21st. So what you've got there, so it's tailoring your approach for your sector and your profession. And then of course I'm going to do a plug for some of the courses that we're offering as well. Okay. So tailor your approach basically whether you're in a UX designer, whether you're a web designer, whether you do a content creation, what actually are different areas that you'll be looking at. So with accessibility then, so facts and figures, which are always never very good. So 3% of the internet is fully accessible to people with disabilities. Okay, 3% is a very, very small number. You would obviously agree. 88% of websites are not compliant with the latest web accessibility standards. So these are the standards which try to dictate how things are making it more accessible for people. So only 88% of that complies. 90% of websites are inaccessible to people with disabilities who use assistive technologies. So if they use a screen reader, if they use different sort of technology to help them access the things, so if they use a switch or they use different sort of input methods, only 90% of websites actually cater for those different areas. This is an interesting one. 1 in 6 people will be over the age of 60 by 2030. And this brings with them acquired degenerative conditions. So again, most people think of disabilities as someone who's in a wheelchair or someone who's blind, but actually they're very rarely considered. Actually, elderly people bring with them degenerative conditions that, again, many people might not think of themselves as being disabled as they're getting older, but actually considering what they might have to go through, like hearing loss and sight loss, maybe they probably will need a lot more accessibility to be done for them. 15% of global population have disabilities, so that equates to about 1.3 billion people, which again is always very, very interesting when you hear companies say, well, actually, we haven't done a lot for disabilities. It's a big, big portion of the population that they are missing out on. And a key area that is becoming very, very big recently is neurological conditions. So this could be someone with autism or dementia, and loads of other sort of like Asperger's and other sort of areas. So about 3 billion people have what is considered a neurological condition, and these are becoming quite big in terms of actually how many people are being diagnosed with these areas. Again, it's not something considered really from the web point of view, but actually there is an awful lot that could be done for these individuals. So how we're looking at them. So the World of Accessibility in 2024, so the full year, where we've got a picture for this one, is on your picture there on the screen, you'll start to see a breakdown by continents. Score out of 100 per continent. The higher the score, the higher the accessibility for that particular continent. Okay, these figures are slightly skewed because certain countries within those continents might do more, some of them may do less. So therefore, you know, it kind of may not give you a very accurate picture. But websites scoring 90 out of 100 were predominantly European or South America based, which the European you may be thinking of, obviously new legislation coming in, but actually South America might surprise some people. The USA, Great Britain, Ecuador, Spain, Argentina have some of the best. Again, there might be obviously because of legislation around that as well, might have a bigger bearing on that one. Websites with accessibility scores of 75 out of 100 have higher revenues. These are things that are always coming up time and time again to say, well, actually, the people who are more compliant and actually more accessible means that actually people with disabilities and additional needs know that those websites are more accessible, so they're more likely to return. Also, if you are more accessible, so for example, if you have the right sort of descriptions for your images and other things, then you are likely to appear higher in the Google search ratings. Right? So again, it just shows actually these are more likely to be people that will actually be clicked on Google because accessibility for their website is much better than others. Average website score is only around about 60 out of 100, which when you think about some of those previous figures shows that actually that much of the websites, their home pages and so on, are not as accessible as they probably should be. So already kind of mentioned a little bit about who we're talking about, but there is this terminology bias. If you mention a word to people about disability, they kind of automatically shut off. Okay, they kind of automatically turn off. The whole idea is actually what is happening here is we think about people with disabilities and they think, well, actually, you know, I don't really need to design much for those guys. But actually, people with disabilities, people getting older, people using mobile devices, and people under heavy stress are a lot of the people who need additional access requirements. So you do need to design things which are a little bit more improvement for those particular people. Okay, so it shows that actually it's not just disabled people. Terming disability narrows the vision of non-disabled people. People with disabilities obviously range from 15%, so therefore what percentage actually are those who need additional access arrangements? They might need a Zoom function, they might need captions for videos, for example. Have you considered those things? Because I'd be very surprised if you would never use captions with a video, considering they are mostly most videos now. So it just shows that something was the class as being assistive for disabled people first is now being rolled out to something which is used for average users now and everyone who's maybe non-disabled. And these are some of the areas of people that we start to look at. So what we start to see then are people with different types of disabilities. So it could be regarding a permanent disability, a temporary, such as an arm injury or a cataract, or a situational. So I recently became a new parent again. So I've tried typing whilst I've been working, whilst holding a 1 month old baby. It's not that easy to do. So therefore, it just shows that I have to kind of adapt my style based upon what situation I'm in at that particular time. So it shows that actually someone who's maybe in a wheelchair or who's registered blind, they are not the only people that we should be considering when it comes down to access requirements and disabilities. These are some of the people we should be considering. The aging population, someone who's maybe native language is not English, cognitive, reduced motor function, and hearing impairments, limited or low vision, situational disabilities or temporary disabilities. Try not to narrow your vision when you're coming down to this idea about who are the people who are disabled. Rephrase that sort of disability thinking. The whole idea is actually you should be thinking about people who require additional access requirements, okay? Who needs additional areas to look at. Digital literacy is something which is very sort of big, but also not recognised in this field as much as it probably should be. So on your screen there, you'll see a graph, which is this is based upon the UK. So the UK did a survey about a year or so ago, and this was just charting how many people felt comfortable with a varied range of tasks online. Okay, so you can see there ranging from very low to very high. And you can see the very, very low is actually about 7% of the population. So 7% of the UK population say they never go online for anything. They just basically they don't know about it, they're too scared of it, they don't want to do it. And then it kind of peaks a little bit again in the very low, goes up again in the high, and then dips down obviously into the very high. So this just shows that maybe actually there's a lot of people who don't really feel that comfortable accessing certain areas, and they get confused with like online banking or the excessive forms that they might have to click on. So the best way to think of your website is a bit like a book, okay? Hence the term digital literacy. There are certain books or certain websites which might be akin to Tolstoy and War and Peace, for example, that are really, really quite difficult for people to navigate. Whereas there might be some other books and websites like Dan Brown, where they think actually, this is actually not too bad. It's very user friendly to pick up. Okay. I like Dan Brown. I've read it. It's quite decent to read, so not bad mouthing Dan Brown's books. But thinking about that digital literacy, how comfortable are people to access and navigate your websites or your digital content? So brings it down to then this point. So what can I, you, and we do? All right. I'm not expecting people to be website developers or UX designers or SEO agents or anything like this. The whole idea is trying to bring it back to you as an individual. Accessibility comes down to everybody's responsibility. Everyone's got a part to play within it. All right. If you've got something digital, you've got to think about what it is that you can physically do. Best thing that you can do is have a persona in mind. Right? That's always the best place to start. Okay, so have someone in your mind. So it could be an elderly relative, for example, or maybe it could be someone with a disability that you know. All right, so what is that person thinking when they are looking at your digital content or when they're looking at your website, for example? Okay, so my persona in my head is I'm imagining Edith, totally fictional character, by the way. She's a retired civil servant, so she's a public sector official. She has no perceived disabilities. Okay, so that's always the interesting thing that people come around to is again, what is that perception? Do they consider themselves being disabled? So, for example, I'm blind in one eye, I'm deaf in one ear, but I do not consider myself to have a disability. However, certain situations means I might struggle a little bit more than others. Okay, so with Edith, so she's not considered disabled. So she has had to bank online since the pandemic. She lives alone, recently been required to order repeat medical prescriptions online, so she has high blood pressure. So these, again, is something which has started to kind of change an awful lot since the pandemic, is where people are being pushed online a lot more because obviously they're kind of, stranded almost. And then the repeat prescriptions, for example, as well. So people have to go online a lot more for a lot more things. So therefore, my idea whenever I'm creating anything is to think about, well, actually, how would Edith react to what I'm creating? Okay. So she's got degenerative eye conditions from age, also a possible side effect from our high blood pressure. She's required to do a 200% zoom on all of the documents that she reads or all the websites that she sees. She's got reduced cognitive function due to her age and requires more time to process. She's easily confused with large bodies of text, moving images such as carousels or busy websites. She's got low digital literacy, generally fearful of scams, so she tends to avoid emails. They're often overwhelming, too frequent, and doesn't know which to trust. Okay. So again, this brings it back to the idea, just because she doesn't have a disability doesn't mean that she doesn't struggle online. Okay. You've got to think about those more perceived perceptions. So she might need extra things to do with Zoom. She might avoid emails. She doesn't like moving images. These are areas we should start to think about with digital areas. So what you can do then is, because we've got now got Edith in mind, you've got better design in five. You've got to think about the five key areas of design. What's the text, color, image, sound, and cognition, right? If you think about these five as your bedrock, as your ultimate fundamental basis, you can't go far wrong. Okay. This is where you're doing a whole lot more than many other people will even think about. Okay. If you do those five things, you're probably already 90% better than much of the content that's out there. And you can do this for anything. The whole idea is you break it down into five areas. So do those five design tips for your websites, your documents, your forms, social media, videos, and pretty much anything you can else think about with digital content. Okay. Always break it down into those five areas, which will then now give you some ideas on how to do that. So this is how I did it. All right. So again, trying to show you that basically this is applying to everybody. Okay. I've been working in this field for a fair while, but again, I always bring it down to these five fundamentals. Okay. So when I created this PowerPoint, I thought about the text. So what was the background color going to be? I wanted to avoid all capital letters. Because that, again, as we kind of know in text speak, maybe it seems like shouting, but actually, when studies are being done on how people recognize words, if it's all capitals, it messes with the original sort of idea of how we learned to read. When we learn to read, we learn to read obviously with a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence and then lowercase after that. And then our brain and our eyes pick up those beginning and the end of a word, and then our brain fills in the gaps in the middle. If, however, it's capital letters, that messes with our original sort of learning process and how we learn to recognize and visually recognize that word in the first place. So even though you think capital letters is bigger and more clear, actually it's messing with our original bedrock learning in our brain. We don't recognize words as all capitals because you never learned to recognize it in all capitals. So think about that next time you see all capital words and letters and sentences. It will probably take you a little bit longer to read it than it would have done if it was in lowercase. So that's again thing to think about. Font style, so not too wavy, so simple sans type font is the best thing to go for. The color of the font, compare that to font to the background color, so it's a contrast ratio. I'll show you something like that in a second. Left align text, so that means don't put it in the middle, because what tends to happen if you put things in the middle or center, align the text, is that the starting of the sentence kind of goes all wavy. So therefore, like I've got there, it's all left aligned. It's all on that same line. If someone has reading difficulty, for example, or learning disability, again, that messes with the flow of how a sentence structure or a paragraph structure looks. So therefore, it probably takes them a little bit longer to recognize and start to see things a bit differently. Image plus text descriptors. So don't just have an image and assume people can see it. You're going to have some text to accompany it as well, because they might have issues focusing on that particular image. So has there been a text descriptor to accompany it? Closed captions options. So again, if there's any sound, is there some way for people to actually read what is being said? Provide a transcript if there's any particular videos. And again, cognition. This is about how you might think and how you might be able to process things. So cognitive ability. So how readable is your document? Again, this is something which is very, very underdeveloped in terms of people's thinking, is actually can a person read your document for their reading age? Okay. And again, I'll show you something on that in a second. Break up large bodies of texts and then a range of learning styles, so video, text, interactive, for example. Okay. So that's how I created this presentation, broke it down into those 5 areas. And by almost second nature, you will eventually start to get to the point where you think, well, actually, I kind of do this already now. And you might think, well, yeah, I do that anyway. But again, there might be 1 or 2 areas where you might want to develop that a little bit more. Confession I've got to make is that I will have missed something. Okay. I'm not going to have said that this is the perfect presentation because I just know that's physically impossible. Okay. So I will have missed something. There will be like an error here. There might have been a typo here, for example. Unfortunately, that's just being human, isn't it? There will be more that I could have done. I've tried to reach out as much as I possibly can do to people. I've tried to learn from what I've done previously. But again, there probably will be more that could have helped more people. And that's because accessibility takes me out of my comfort zone every single day, right? Something for you to think about is actually like that is what is happening. That is kind of normal, even for someone in the sector, even today, even no matter how many years experience that they've had, there's always, again, something where you could be learning. Taking you out of the comfort zone is probably the best way to learn. And that's where I'm always learning, and I'm always open to learn as well, which again, the fact that your people are on this call shows that you're probably in the same boat as me. So what am I talking about then? So let's start with color. Avoid using color alone to convey important information. Now, this image that you'll see here has got the reds, oranges, yellows, greens, and it was a sales tactic, if you like, or a sales image where they tried to say, right, okay, if you show people this color, it might make them feel happy, or show them this other color, it might make things feel warm or exclusive or cold. Okay. But again, problem with that is actually not everyone can see color. So for example, some people may just be seeing it in a grayscale. They might be colorblind, for example. So therefore, all they just see are varying colors of gray or black or white. And therefore, you've only got loads of words in there to go with a particular color. Okay. So you've got to think about, are you just showing people, are you saying to someone, push the green button? Will they know which one's the button? Will they know because you said the word green? Okay. Do they know where it is? Try and team it with something else. So try and say like the word enter is on the green button at the bottom left-hand corner, something like that. So there's 3 or 4 different directions for it. Very, very quick, simple fix. If you are, however, unsure, what you can do is if you've got a Windows operating system, there are color filter settings, which will then take you through to the accessibility function. And then there is a toggle there to say color filter on or off. Okay, so typing that into your search bar in the Windows, down the bottom of the Windows, that will take you that nice and easily. All you then need to do, easy to switch it back again if you don't want to keep it that way. But again, it just shows that maybe you can see your presentation or you can see your website in grayscale. Apple also have the same settings. So again, go into accessibility settings and simply enable grayscale. Nice, easy way of doing it. Another example is what I mentioned about the font to background contrast ratio. So there are 3 examples of bad contrast ratio, and there's 1 good example. Again, there's loads of different ways you can do this, but again, sometimes just thinking about actually, can I see that? Would other people be able to see it? Because you'd be surprised the amount of big companies that have logos which are very, very poorly designed. So some of them might have a white and a yellow background, for example, and then some of these are very poor and they don't even consider accessibility when they make these. So sometimes when you see a rebrand, for example, sometimes, or hopefully, it's for these accessibility reasons. There are charts which look like this. So it shows you what your foreground color should be compared to your background color, and it shows you which are the good or the bad ratings. So this is like a nice, easy one, for example. So you can see this is how it's like a good or poor or better. All right, but there are other ways of actually doing this as well. This is a good website as well. So you've got WebAIM. So if you just type this into Google, it's got nice and easily for you. All you've got to do is, so it's got an eyedropper. So if you know what the hex color is, if you know what that is, then obviously you'll know what I mean. Then you can put that in, or you can just simply use an eyedropper. So you can click on the foreground, you can click on the background, and then it will give you a contrast ratio. I'm going to go into what the contrast ratios are. They're on the screen there if you want to do that for yourself. But what I tend to do is look down the bottom there where it says normal text, large text, and graphical objects. So you can see there the ones that it's passing. I just try and make it as passable as possible. Try to say it's pass here, pass here, pass here, for example. Okay. And then it gives you the criteria, which again, I'm not going to go too much into this one, for example. Okay. Yes, the video will be available because I am aware that there's only so much I can go through. Yes, so it will also refer to button color and also background color as well. So it tends to be anything really where you've got it's said to be, if anything's classed as essential information. So if there are directions, if it's the button color compared to the text on that button color, yes, it will always kind of need to be there as well. It will vary, as you can see there with that screenshot that I've got about normal text versus large text versus graphical text. Again, I've tried to break it down depending on which sort of ratio is needed, whether it's for more normal text or large text. But as a kind of rule of thumb, I always try and stick with maybe like a ratio of 4 or 5 colors, and I'll stick with those. So you can see here I've got white text on a blue background, or I just try and keep it with the original sort of white to black, for example. So I just try and keep that sort of small palette that I tend to be using. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, let me know. So next one then. So images. Best thing I think about is, can you hear the image? All right. The one thing that I was always kind of sticks in my mind is when someone at a call center had someone who was disabled, who was using a screen reader, and they rang up the customer support agent. And when the person on the other end of the phone said, "I'm having trouble hearing your website," of course, the person on the support line didn't even know what she was talking about, okay? Because they thought, well, actually, how can you hear my website? So again, this is an area where maybe like a lack of training causes that bit of an issue. So is someone able to know what that image is without having any visual representation of it? I cannot see it. All right. So there are lots of different ways of doing this in different sort of areas, so maybe like Word or PowerPoint, for example. So text descriptors for those unable to view. So does it need to be just marked as decorative? So if you've got a banner across the top, which is just like wavy lines and so on, there's a function in Microsoft PowerPoint where you can right click it and say mark as decorative. And that way you don't need to consider any text, for example, you don't need to worry about it. And the person who's got the screen reader won't need to worry about it because it's not essential information. It's not giving them something that they need. Okay. When you sometimes put an image into Microsoft Word, sometimes now it would have an AI auto-generated description. So someone who's got a screen reader, when they've got the screen reader on that document, it will automatically read the text that you've written, but also what the auto-generated text has been generated for that image. This isn't very good a lot of the time, if I'm honest with you. So I'll show you in a second how you can adjust it. Okay, it's a very, very simple process of basically just describing the image as best as you possibly can. Okay, use keywords. Don't start with the word image or picture of, because that's implied, because the screen reader will pick up image shows such and such, whatever description it is that you put in. Okay, consider the surrounding text and context of your image. Make sure wherever you put your image is relating to the text you place it in, because we don't want an image which relates to 2 or 3 pages prior, because of course that's not going to be then very relevant. So what you can do if you're in Microsoft Word, so you can see an image there of 3 people gathered around a laptop and a computer working, for example. That's probably how the text would describe it. So if you want to do that, right click it, and then about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see there, view alt text or edit alt text, and then a little bar will appear on the side, and that's where you can just type in your description. Okay. Short and sweet is always the best way of doing this. Okay. If you've got to put loads and loads and loads of text in to describe your image, I'm going to cover that on the next slide. Okay. With Apple, again, do exactly the same sort of method of doing this. So right click it, edit alt text, this will appear, and then you just write in a simple description for that particular image. If you want to check it for websites, if you want to do a website check, for example, so if you're on Chrome, you can get an extension, so image alt text viewer. So these are always really good. So if you are just interested in learning more about this, just try and go to your websites once you've downloaded an extension and just see what other people are doing, or rather not doing. because again, these are one of the big areas where people just don't do it because they don't understand it, whereas actually it should be one of the basic things that people do. And then for same for Firefox as well. So you've got an image alt as well for Firefox. Okay, copy and pasted images. So if you've got an infographic, infographics are amazing because they give you so much information in a very, very small package, if you like. All right, it contains an awful lot. It's got a lot of images to go with it. What do you do? All right. Best way to kind of think about it is to have the infographic, but have a text alternative. Okay. Because a copy and pasted image, such as an infographic that contains so much information, don't put that in the alt text because again it needs to be one sentence at most for the alt text. So therefore, if you're doing an infographic, make a text alternative document. So sometimes what you can do, if it's a PDF document, you can go into websites where you can redact that PDF and put it into a Word document, for example. So one of the examples is I Love PDF is a website, I Love PDF. And that's one website where you can put your PDF document into it. It will generate a Word document, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, all the text will be taken from that infographic and made into a nice Word document. Make sure you check it first. But again, we're not expecting you to kind of reinvent the wheel. There are ways and means out there to do this. Okay. If you're making a website or if you're making links, for example, if a image has to be clicked on to initiate an action, it needs to be described what that action is. Okay, because the thing is, if you haven't described what that link is going to do, then that person could click on it accidentally and take them to a website or an area that they don't want to be. And this is a big area with regards to accessibility and security. People don't realize that accessibility has a lot of security risks with it, because if you don't mark that button to say it's a link, and if you click on it, it will take you to this page, then that person might be giving away information that they don't want to by visiting that website. So therefore, people are often very, very confused with how closely intertwined accessibility and security are. All right. There could be a lot of potential GDPR risks with this as well. And again, I think it's a very, very under researched area. There needs to be a lot more being done on this area. So bear that in mind. So the infographic then. So is the image essential for understanding context and content? If you've put that infographic on there, hopefully it means it's got to be something useful that you want people to get out of it. Place it in the body text, not in the alt text, or it's sometimes classed as an alt attribute. Okay, put it into the main body of whichever document it is that you're putting it in. Don't sideline it to an alt text. That's not where it should be. Alt text designed for additional information. Body text designed for essential information. Okay, hope that makes sense. Use alt text to explain what function will be carried out. Okay, so the image that I've just put on the side there, so this is the W3C. It's got the image, but it's also got the little link next to it. So it doesn't matter whether you click on the image of W3C or whether you click on the link, which is underlined, they both do the same function. Okay, it's an accompaniment rather than a repeated action. So we don't want you to click on the image plus the link for them to both do the same thing. You click on one, they both encapsulate as the same thing. Okay. All right. Text is another big one. So I taught for 13 years in a secondary school, and being able to access things just by reading is a big area, which I think again is under research and underappreciated, especially with the general public. If you're putting something out there for the general public to read, it should be readable to 11 to 12-year-old. For the American audience, that's a grade 7 to 8. Okay. So what the whole idea is you've got to test somebody's reading age. The general population tends to have a reading age of about 11 to 12-year-olds, which is incredibly surprising for an awful lot of people. So therefore, if you put your reading age or put text in or content in or words in that are higher than a grade 8 level, or maybe a 13-year-old level or a 14-year-old level, 85% of the public will not be able to access it. You got to hang in the air a little bit. Okay, you need to be aiming it at a 12-year-old, lower than a 12-year-old. Okay, in order for 85% of the public to be able to access it. You need short, clear sentences. Use acronyms sparingly. So I know a lot of companies have a lot of acronyms because they do. That's often the way it comes down to it. But actually, if you spell what those mean, it's always helpful. Consider an easy read version if it is needed. Maybe set a reading time. So this is something that comes out quite a lot now with reading times, for example. How long is it going to take you to read that particular document? All right. Again, that kind of gives people maybe a bit of an ease as to say, can I access this document? Do I want to read this document? So how do you test this? Good question. It's not moving. There we go. One website you can use, there's different ways I'm going to show you. One of them is if you type into Google NHS medical document readability tool. Don't be put off by the fact it's a medical document readability tool. Whole idea is obviously medical documents tend to have a lot of big jargon in them. So therefore the NHS has made this nice handy tool to make sure that maybe doctors and the general public can put this in to say, can a person access this? Which is a very good tool because most people who maybe access the NHS or access medicine will require maybe additional needs, for example, so they might have a low reading age, for example. So if you put your text into this readability tool, it will churn out how difficult it is for that particular person to be able to read it. Okay. So again, play around with this one for yourself. I know it's not very clear on this particular image, but it will give you a breakdown of how easy these things are. And I'll show you what this means in a second. If you have it within, which is very annoying that it's now changed. So apologize that text has now taken over the top of that one. But if you're in Microsoft Word, along the top banner, go to the very far right hand corner and you'll see the word editor, which is a bit that's been covered here, so I do apologize, is the word editor. And then go on further on down and then click on document stats, and then it will bring up this area for you. Okay, so Microsoft Word, click on editor, click on document stats, and then it will display readability statistics. It'll tell you how many words, sentences per paragraph, and so on and so forth. The bit you're looking at is the bottom, is the readability. So the Flesch reading ease or the Flesch King card grade level. Okay, so there is a way of translating this one. So I'll show you what that means. What you are aiming for is something between 60 and 100. Okay, so that's the Flesch reading ease. So you're looking for something between 60 and 100 is where you want it to be. Basically, the lower the number, the harder it is. So if you've got something which is between 0 and 30, it's a college grade level. You'll need someone with a university degree, for example, to be able to access it. And that means there's an average words per sentence of 29. Therefore, the more sentence, the harder it is. All right, so you basically want to try and get it as high a score as possible. So if I go back to this document here, for example, all right, so it's 27.2. So it's a very hard document for people to read. I want it close to as 100 as I possibly can get it. That will be hard in certain areas, but again, you know, you've at least tried as best as you possibly can do. There will be certain areas where this will be impossible because you might be the type of content that it is. So WebAIM, which is a big company which obviously looks at accessibility, they said certain content will be so complex that you just can't make it 100% accessible. All right. The idea is making the effort to make it accessible. All right. If you've done that, you've got a lot further than many other people. So next bit, final bit. This is what we've been looking at then. When we're considering our next sort of step of the journey, and your next step of the journey is you've obviously thought about the persona in mind. You've got someone in your mind. Feel free to use Edith. All right, very, very good tool to use. If you've got someone else in mind, always the best way of doing it. Okay, so you've got text, color, image, sound, cognition. Those are the sort of famous five, if you like, if you want a phrase to go with it. All right, consider those 5 areas before you've done anything else. Then what you then need to go on to as a next sort of step in the journey is how will your digital content be accessed? So they're looking at it on the phone, on the web, are they listening to it with other assistive technology? The reason why I said this is the other step of the journey is because you need to start with that 5. Start with a text, color, image, sound, cognition. Okay, don't try and jump 3 or 4 steps ahead. It's very, very tempting with all the sort of background noise out there to think about assistive technology, to think about legislation, to think about WCAG and all the rest of it, but actually start with the basics. It starts with you designing good text, designing good colors, designing good images. Okay, start there, and then you can start to build up from there on in. Okay, that's what the next session next week will start to think about. Then what you might start to think about as the next step in your journey is the most commonly used areas. Okay, if you want to think about your website or your digital space, what areas are being used the most, and therefore what should I prioritize, making sure that it's got good text and good color and good images, and you start maybe doing fixing and finding and fixing on an ad hoc basis. And then later on, you might think about an audit. Okay. Once you've started off on it, you might think, well, actually, I might think about a bigger overall picture. But do not start doing that bigger overall picture until you've started to kind of implement some of it for yourself and start to think about, well, actually, how do I do the text? How do I do the color? How do I do the image? Okay. Start small and then build big. That's the best way of doing it. Okay. Try not to go too far ahead too quickly. Many people lose their sight on the accessibility journey because they try and do too much too quickly. All right. So hopefully that has helped you out. All right. Like I say, it has been recorded, so I can go back. I can feel free to email me, ask questions, whatever it may well be. All right. But hopefully that has given you at least a little bit of a starting point. Next session is going to be a week today. So this one's looking at the project management side of stuff. So what that basically means is taking what you've done and making it go further. All right. Again, for those people who have been on this call, it probably is worth you carrying on to do the next bit because you start to think about the beginning part of your journey, and then you might think about, well, actually, what can I do in 3 months? What can I do in 6 months? And then this one gives you a nice checklist to say, well, I've done this, I've done this, and I've done this. Okay. And then the final session, which is on the 21st, and that's tailoring your approach for your sector. So how do you look at things from a content creation point of view? How do you look at things from a web designer point of view? How do you look at things from a UX point of view? Okay. Again, we're trying to think about tailoring that for you. Okay. Again, the whole idea about asking me anything, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to stay on the call for until now for another 10 minutes or so to try and give you some ideas actually that can what it is that you want to do. And actually then start to think about, well, actually, I want to ask this question or I want to know about this. If you don't want to stay on the call now, feel free to email me later on. Again, we're going to be looking at these things a bit next lesson as well, next session, to try and see how these things will actually want to be applicable for you and hopefully working best for you as well. Okay. So like I said, that's it from me. So the session will be recorded. There's a YouTube link for National Upskill, which I will email out to you. So what we'll do is, like I say, I'll email that out to you, and then obviously you can get some ideas about actually look back at this if you want to see it a bit later on as well. But if you attend all 3 sessions, so we'll be giving you out a free resource as well. There's a massive resource pack which I'm going to be giving out to you for free if you attend all 3 sessions, which again is obviously a little plug to try and get you to stay on, but it's going to be worth your while. So feel free to stay behind. Feel free to ask some questions if you've got anything. But other than that, keep an eye out for some emails, and I hope to see you for the next session. Okay, which will be this time next week. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Daniel. Hope to see you next week.